The Pokemon Go incident, Japan. On August 22nd, 2016, the streets of Tokushima, Japan, shimmered under neon lights after a late summer rain. Crowds moved between crosswalks, umbrellas glistening in the glow of storefront signs. Among them, a 39-year-old man walked quickly, eyes fixed on his phone. The game Pokemon Go had just launched weeks earlier, and dozens of players roamed the streets, hunting for rare creatures. Witnesses saw him crossing the same intersection repeatedly, phone raised, muttering as he followed the map. The light from passing cars flickered across his face. Horns blared when he stepped too close to traffic, but he didn't look up. At 8:40 p.m., the signal changed. He took another step forward, just as a small truck turned the corner. The sound of tires screeching cut through the noise of the city. His phone flew from his hand, sliding across the wet asphalt. A woman screamed. Drivers stopped in the middle of the road while pedestrians rushed toward the crosswalk. Someone knelt beside him, shouting for help, as another dialed emergency services. Within minutes, red and blue lights flooded the intersection. Paramedics pushed through the crowd and began chest compressions under the glow of street lamps. Police redirected traffic, while commuters stood motionless on the sidewalks, watching in silence. When the ambulance doors closed, the phone still lay on the ground, its screen cracked but glowing faintly. The map on the display was frozen on the same spot where he had fallen. By morning, newspapers across Japan printed the image, and the quiet intersection in Tokushima had become a scene of national tragedy. But Japan wasn't the only place where the game turned deadly. The Pokemon Go cliff fall, United States. On July 12, 2016, along a coastal trail in Encinitas, California, two teenage friends spent the afternoon chasing digital creatures across the cliffs. The sun reflected off their phone screens as they followed the narrow path, laughing as the game's signal drew them closer to the ocean. Other hikers passed them, noticing that neither boy looked up from his device. One of them pointed toward the edge, saying the rare Pokemon appeared stronger there. The barrier of loose stones marked the end of the safe trail, but they stepped past it. A gust of wind swept through, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. Moments later, gravel shifted under their feet, followed by two sharp cries that echoed against the rocks below. Within minutes, rangers and lifeguards arrived. Helicopters hovered low as ropes were lowered down the cliff face. The first boy was found wedged between ledges, unconscious but breathing. The second had fallen farther, lying among boulders near the surf. Teams worked through the fading light to retrieve them while police blocked off the path above. By nightfall, floodlights illuminated the cliff as rescuers lifted the stretchers upward. Beachgoers gathered silently below, the rhythmic sound of waves mixing with the whir of helicopter blades. The next morning, caution tape fluttered at the trailhead, the boys' footprints still visible in the dust beside the broken stones. The PUBG mobile incident. On February 18, 2019, in the narrow lanes of Indore, Madhya Pradesh, the night air was still and heavy. Inside a small apartment, a 19-year-old man sat at his desk with his headset on, the rapid rhythm of gunfire and footsteps pulsing from his phone. The blue light from the screen reflected off his glasses as he leaned closer, eyes fixed on the match. Empty snack wrappers and half-finished energy drinks covered the table beside him. Hours passed. His mother called him for dinner, then again near midnight, but he never turned around. Outside, stray dogs barked in the alley while the glow from his window stayed constant. Around dawn, neighbors heard faint shouts of victory, followed by silence. Inside the room, his game character sprinted across the battlefield, shots ringing out through his headphones. At 10 a.m., his online teammates suddenly heard him yell once, then nothing. His character stopped moving mid-match. When his mother entered, she found him slumped forward in the chair, his hands frozen over the device. The screen flickered with the final replay of his match. She screamed for help, her voice echoing down the narrow stairwell. Neighbors rushed upstairs. Some tried to shake him awake, others called for an ambulance. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their radios crackling as they pushed through the crowd. They carried him down the stairs, the sound of the stretcher wheels scraping the steps. Outside, curious onlookers filled the street as flashing red lights reflected against the nearby windows. By afternoon, the news spread across television and social media. Journalists gathered outside the small apartment, filming the door still left ajar. Through the half-closed curtain, the faint blue glow of his phone could still be seen. The game frozen on the same frame where he had stopped playing. The Tetris mobile incident. On March 11, 2017, in Seoul, South Korea, the pale glow of phone screens lit the late-night subway. Among the passengers sat a 29-year-old office worker named Min Seok Park, his headphones in. The game Tetris Mobile opened on his screen. He played daily during his commute, stacking blocks as the train rattled through the tunnels. That night, he missed his stop. CCTV footage later showed him leaning forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on the screen. The train reached the final station and emptied, but Min Seok never moved. A cleaner found him minutes later, still seated, the phone slipping from his hand, the game frozen mid-level, soft music repeating through his earbuds. Emergency services arrived quickly, but his pulse had stopped. When the station reopened before dawn, a single phone lay on the bench where he had been found, its battery fading to black as the first train of the morning rolled in. In another city, years later, a student would spend his nights chasing a virtual world that never slept. The Genshin Impact Incident. On November 4th, 2021, inside a university dormitory in Chengdu, the air was thick with the faint hum of electronics and the smell of instant noodles. A 20-year-old student sat at his desk, phone in hand, the soft light illuminating his face. The newest Genshin Impact update had been released 3 days earlier, and he was determined to unlock a rare character before classes resumed. Friends dropped by during the first 2 days. Takeout boxes and empty cans piled higher on the windowsill. They joked about his dedication, but he waved them off, eyes fixed on the glowing screen. By the third night, the halls outside were quiet. His roommates heard only the soft tapping of his fingers against the phone and the faint music of the game playing through his headphones. At around 3 a.m., his group chat messages grew shorter. Screenshots, unfinished sentences, and then nothing. His screen stayed lit as the hours passed. Outside, the sky turned gray, and the sound of rain began to tap against the dorm windows. Shortly before dawn, a loud crash broke the silence. His roommate turned on the light and saw the chair overturned, the phone lying on the floor beside him, still glowing. Security guards arrived quickly, followed by paramedics who moved carefully through the narrow hall. The sound of their radios echoed through the corridor as students gathered outside, whispering. Rescuers worked in near silence, their movements reflected in the polished floor tiles. When they carried the stretcher through the hallway, no one spoke. Police sealed the room, taping a notice to the door. For days afterward, the faint yellow light from the desk lamp continued to shine behind the frosted glass, illuminating the empty chair that faced the phone still resting on the desk. The Clash of Clans incident. On May 9, 2018, in a quiet suburb of Bangkok, the morning light seeped through thin curtains into a small bedroom. Inside, a young man sat slouched on the floor, his phone still displaying the familiar layout of Clash of Clans. He had spent the night managing his village, checking for attacks, setting traps, and rebuilding walls. His mother knocked softly, calling him for breakfast. When there was no response, she opened the door. The air smelled of instant coffee and stale heat. He lay beside the bed, motionless. The game paused mid-battle. She screamed for help as neighbors rushed from nearby homes. Paramedics arrived minutes later, their flashing lights reflecting off the window glass. They worked quickly, but the small house was silent except for the faint sound of the game still running on his phone. Outside, a small crowd gathered along the narrow street as the stretcher was carried through the doorway. His parents stood frozen, watching as the ambulance disappeared. Later that evening, his online clan noticed his absence. Messages filled the chat room, their leader name flashing online for the last time.